This is the 2019 Porsche Cayenne Turbo, and it's pretty much the gold standard of the luxury performance SUV. These days, everyone has a luxury performance SUV, even Lamborghini and Bentley and Maserati, but the Cayenne Turbo seems to be the ultimate combination of performance and luxury without truly insane pricing. Although at $160,000, this thing is hardly cheap. Anyway, the Cayenne has been completely redesigned for the 2019 model year, and today I'm going to show you around the all-new model. I've borrowed this Cayenne Turbo from Circle Porsche here in Long Beach, California, in the Los Angeles area, where the brand new Cayenne is just starting to arrive. And Circle Porsche has been kind enough to let me spend the day with this one to see exactly what to expect from Porsche's latest version of its high-performance SUV. First, a little overview. Now, the new Cayenne looks a lot like the old Cayenne, but it has been updated in the tradition of Volkswagen and Audi, Porsche's parent company, with subtle styling evolutions rather than revolutions when new models come out. And if you look around the car, you can see some major stylistic updates, especially in back. Under the hood of the Cayenne Turbo is a 540 horsepower twin-turbo V8, which also makes 570 pound-feet of torque, and 0 to 60 is 3.6 seconds. That's pretty impressive, but then the Cayenne has always been an impressive performance SUV ever since it came out back in 2003, more than 15 years ago now. It's hard to believe. The latest Cayenne is the fastest, most technologically advanced, and most expensive Cayenne ever, and today I'm going to take you on a tour of the top-level version, the Cayenne Turbo, and I'm going to show you all the quirks and features of Porsche's new SUV. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the Cayenne Turbo, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also rounded up a list of the cheapest used Porsche models currently listed for sale on AutoTrader. Now I'm going to start the quirks and features with the gear lever, which is kind of unusual in its operation. Now, to shift between gears, you can't really see it, but there's a little trigger in the back of the gear lever. You pull it, and then you can shift into reverse and neutral and drive. That's a little different from most cars, but not all that unusual. A little bit more unusual is the fact that park is not included in that trigger shift thing. Instead, park is a little button on the front of the shift lever at the very bottom. If you want to put the car in park, you press this tiny little button and it goes into park. But the weirdest thing about the gear lever is that if you move it over into manual mode, that's the mode that allows you to shift gears manually, obviously, and then you're in manual mode and you want to go into park, you press the little P button for park, and then the shift lever automatically moves over from manual mode to park, as if a ghost has moved it. It's a kind of interesting little operation because apparently the car can't go into park when the shift lever is moved over to the side. It has to go back into the middle before it has officially selected park. Now, around the gear lever, you have all of this car's controls in this giant center control area, and you'll notice there aren't really any buttons in here. Instead, you have everything split into two rather cool-looking items. One, these little levers, these silver levers that you push, they can adjust the climate control. You move them up and down to change the air temperature or the amount of air. And then there's one in the middle that's like a roller silver thing, and that adjusts the stereo volume. Those are pretty nice looking, and they feel good to touch, but by far the coolest, the most futuristic part of this center control stack are the rest of the buttons. They're not really buttons. Instead, they're just pieces on this black panel, and they're dark when the car is off. When you turn the car on, they all light up to show you what they can do, and when you want to turn them on, you just tap them, and there is a little bit of feedback when you tap them so you know you've actually pressed it, just like a button. It looks a lot cooler than a whole array of plastic buttons like so many cars have. This black screen that completely turns off when the car is off to give it a more stealth and modern look. Now, the other benefit with this black panel is no more blink switches. The theory is if you don't have plastic buttons, then you don't have little plastic blinks for options that you didn't get. Except You still do. Check this out. This car doesn't have a few of the features at the base of this little black panel, and so those buttons are simply blacked out and they never light up when you turn on the car, and you can't press them. And you shouldn't be able to see them, except in direct sunlight you actually can see them. Individual and e-power and this little P with a steering wheel, I guess for automated parking, those are features we don't have in this Cayenne, and so even though it has button screens, it still has blank switches. Porsche simply cannot resist blank switches in its vehicles. Anyway, moving on from the center control stack and on to the center console. Not particularly interesting. You open it, it has storage. The interesting part is the lid. You can see it has the Porsche crest emblazoned on it. Very nice looking. And of course, optional, that is a $450 option because Porsche charges extra for everything. Of course, by now, the fact that Porsche charges extra for everything has sort of become a meme in the car enthusiast world. They charge you extra for transparent windows and round wheels. But it's worth noting that there are a lot of options on this car to get it to the equipment level where it is. The base price is $125,000 for the new Cayenne Turbo. This one has a sticker price of $160,000. So not only is it the top-end turbo model, but it still has $35,000 in options. Now, part of the reason it's so expensive, though, it has two major options. One is the Burmester sound system, which is one of the best sound systems you can get in practically any car. And the other is the carbon ceramic brakes. Both of those options are over $5,000 each. And so they do a good part in bringing that price up from the $125,000 base to the $160,000 total sticker price. And by the way, while I'm on the subject of the window sticker, one interesting item of the window sticker, you look at it at the very top, it says Porsche, built in Bratislava. Now, I don't want to be mean to anybody in Bratislava here, but I think a lot of the people who buy this car are buying it for its German engineering and its German Porsche heritage, not because it was built in Bratislava. I'm not surprised that it's built there, but I am surprised they're so proud of that fact that they put it at the very top of the window sticker. I wonder how many people look at it and say, wait a minute, I thought this thing was built in Stuttgart. Next up, another interesting item in the center of this car, that would be the clock, which is in the very middle on the top of the dashboard. You can see the clock has a digital display, which seems normal, but then there's also a hand that's counting seconds, as it turns out. The digital display is very small, about the size of a fingernail, but then you have this large second hand that goes around and around as if seconds are the most important aspect of a clock. I don't know why that's the priority, but it is. Next up, another item that Porsche does just a little differently than everyone else. Instead of a start-stop button, which basically every luxury car has now, Porsche has a start-stop lever. You get in, you twist a lever rather than press a button, and that turns on the car, I guess, to sort of give you that feel of turning a key, like in Porsches from the old days. And next up, another interesting item. If you look at the steering wheel, you can see the steering wheel has a lot of functions, a lot of buttons, paddle shifters, and it also has two scroll wheels. Obviously, one of those is for stereo volume, except it isn't. The scroll wheel over on the left controls the gauge cluster on the left. The scroll wheel on the right controls the gauge cluster on the right. If you want to adjust stereo volume, it's these little plus-minus buttons on the steering wheel, which is very unusual. Almost everyone uses a scroll wheel, but not Porsche. Next up, speaking of the gauge cluster, let's go back to that for a second because it has a few cool features. Now, to the left, you have a couple of gauges that show some information you might need, but the most interesting part is over on the right. Use this little scroll wheel on the steering wheel to scroll through various different vehicle displays, and it shows a few different items, and it also will show the navigation map, which is kind of cool. In fact, while I was scrolling through it, I didn't even realize that whole right portion of the gauge cluster was a screen until the gauges disappeared and the map showed up there. So you can look at gauges for various vehicle information, or you can look at the navigation map. And with that, since we're talking technology, I'm going to move on to the center infotainment screen. Now, I've already covered a lot of the features of Porsche's latest infotainment system in my review of the new Panamera Turbo and the Panamera Sport Turismo, and I'll link those videos below. But I'm going to touch on a couple of highlights, my favorite of which is the backup camera in this car. Put this thing in reverse, turn the wheel, and the backup camera swivels. Check this out. It isn't just the backup camera lines move to show where your path might be, like in most cars, but instead the camera itself turns to show your upcoming path, which makes it easier to see where you're backing up. You can see against this BMW M2, as I turn the wheel, the camera is actually swiveling to show where where I'll be backing up. That is a brilliant idea. This isn't as good as the 360 camera system in Audi and BMW models, but it's a really good feature for a rear backup camera. Can't believe nobody else has thought of that until now. It's brilliant. Next up, we move into the rear of the new Cayenne, and there are a couple of interesting quirks back here, starting with the fact that even in the back, this car has sport seats. Take a look at what I mean. Look at the bench. Instead of just having a flat bench back here, Porsche curves up even the side bolsters in the center of the rear seat, so the seat can hug rear passengers in corners. I've never really seen that before, but I guess it makes sense in a car like this, where if you're going 140 through a corner, you'll want to make sure the rear passengers stay put. A couple of other interesting items in the back seat here. One is the fact that even the rear passengers in this car have this same black panel for climate controls, just like the front passengers. They also have the same little black touch buttons and these same silver switches that you can use to adjust the climate control temperature and the airflow, just like the front seat passengers, which is a surprisingly nice and expensive looking touch for rear seat occupants. The final interesting item in the rear seats to me is just how easy they are to fold down. In a lot of cars, you have to reach in and find a latch, which is usually hidden somewhere up here on the back of the seat next to the headrest. Not in this car. Instead, there is a very easily accessible silver latch right next to where the door opens. You open the door, pop the silver latch, and the seat folds right down easily, so you can make more room if you want to put something larger in the cargo area. Next up, moving on to the cargo area, you open up the power rear tailgate, and you can see the cargo area is reasonably sized for a vehicle like this. No complaints. But the first thing you notice back there is the fact that this car has a fence. That's right, it has a nice cargo area fence like you'd see on a ranch, just in case you have cargo area cattle that you have to keep in their pen. Now, interestingly, the fence can be folded up and placed inside of this cool Porsche zippered bag. And so that's a tour of the brand new Porsche Cayenne Turbo. Now it's time to get it on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the new Cayenne Turbo. I love driving the Cayenne Turbo. It's just such a well put together sporty luxury SUV in every way. The materials are just fantastic. And unlike with the X5, you get the sense that if this was designed to be a high performance SUV from day one, and this almost feels like its natural state, as opposed to the X5, where it feels like the X5M is sort of uptuned compared to the regular, more consumer X5. The ride is really good, surprisingly quiet in here. The materials are just excellent. Everything you touch and feel is so well put together, and there's absolutely no creaking or rattling anywhere. That's generally true of new cars, but not as many as you might think. Whoa! Whoa! Oh, that's some power. All right, now I'm in sport mode, and I have to say the shifts are quicker. The shifts are just as fast as you would expect from the fastest automatics. So I guess if you have it in comfort mode, the shifts are a little lazier, obviously, for comfort purposes, which makes total sense to me. I'm surprised how well you're insulated from the road. You know, Porsche realizes that they've got a lot more competition now in this luxury performance SUV space than they did when this car first came out. And they got competition on all sides, including Bentley and Range Rover that have gotten nicer, more luxurious, and others that have gotten sportier. And this car really does that luxury thing better than I think that it used to. The original Porsche Cayenne, when it came out 15 years ago, was just not all that luxurious. Even by the standards of that time, there were big panel gaps. A lot of the interior colors were weird. Some of the materials weren't so great. This car is not like that at all. They have really stepped up their game, and this is now absolutely top class in this segment. And so that's the 2019 Porsche Cayenne Turbo, the latest and fastest Cayenne Turbo ever, at least until the Cayenne Turbo S inevitably arrives with even more power. The Lamborghini Urus may be faster, and the Mercedes-AMG GLS 63 may have more seats, but the Cayenne Turbo is still the Porsche of SUVs, quite literally. And now it's time to give it a Doug score.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the Cayenne Turbo is handsome, though I wish it looked more distinct from the old model. Still, it's a nice look, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Acceleration to 0 to 60 in 3.6 seconds, so it gets an 8 out of 10. Handling is sharp for an SUV, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Fun factor is strong given its big power and impressive steering. It gets a 5 out of 10, which is great for an SUV, and it gets a 32 out of 50 in the weekend categories. Next up are the daily categories and features. The Cayenne Turbo has a lot of stuff, but it's missing a few features compared to rivals, like the 360-degree camera or the navigation word writing destination input thing, among others, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Comfort is impressive, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Quality is supremely strong, and it gets an 8 out of 10, falling just short of a perfect score due to potential long-term reliability concerns. Practicality is decent, and it earns an easy 8 out of 10, though it would grab an extra point if Porsche would add a third row. Finally, value. This is monstrously expensive compared to the Range Rover Velar, for instance, but it's a steal compared to the Lamborghini Urus, which is surprisingly not that much faster. The value score is right in the middle for a 6 out of 10, meaning it gets a total daily score of 37 out of 50. Add it up and the Doug score is 69 out of 100, and here's how it stands against rivals. I've tested basically everything in this segment, and the Cayenne Turbo is the best, though it's also the most expensive. I'd rather have a new E63 AMG wagon, but most people don't like wagons. If you want the ultimate performance SUV, the Cayenne Turbo is it, although I haven't yet driven the Lamborghini Urus for comparison.